So in today's video, I'll talk about 5 interesting questions in job interviews with Meta, and the objective being here to help you to perfection your behavioral interviewing skills, or if you are particularly short on time, this is a minimal prep for you to consider. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. How do you deal with conflict? Now, why would someone ask you for such a question in a job interview? Well, let me be clear here. Regardless of how qualified you are for your role, the moment you'll come across as argumentative or bad-mouthing others, or simply someone who lacks the most basic interpersonal skills, they're not likely to be willing to take a risk with you, okay? So what you're looking for here is a story to picture yourself as someone willing and able to mediate or positively influence a conflict primarily through your listening skills, okay? Which is, of course, easier said than done, especially to find your stories. Now, I know many of you are by now like, meh, they're just looking for people who know their thing. To which my question for you would be, well, why do so many well-respected and exceptionally talented leaders fail these interviews? This is rarely because they refuse Meta's offer, okay? The first most commonly asked question in job interviews with Meta is, unsurprisingly, your elevator pitch. Now, I won't bore you with details because there's plenty of examples, including some basic ones on my YouTube channel, on how do you go about answering this. However, I will just say this. Some candidates go as far as to prefer having multiple answers depending on who is interviewing them. Another interesting type of question in job interviews with Meta is about dealing with ambiguous situations. Let's take an example.
In January 2019, Bank A and Microsoft committed to deliver the migration of small business data software company X, part of Bank A, to Azure before the end of the year. I was responsible for defining company X's target architecture and getting it approved by the bank's cybersecurity team. When I engaged cybersecurity in March 2019, their security requirements towards company X were ambiguous, incoherent, and contradictory, putting the whole migration at risk. I continued to have consultations, eventually getting them to ask Microsoft to educate them on cloud-native approaches to security in Azure. I organized a series of workshops, involved Microsoft security experts in order to share the newest offerings and trends in Azure. I also had 2 versions of the target architecture ready, cloud-native and traditional, which was 3 times more expensive, to drive home the recommendation to endorse cloud-native. Towards July 2019, cybersecurity's requirements became unambiguous and aligned with the cloud-native recommendation. The migration went ahead and was delivered ahead of schedule. Notice how this answer paints the candidate as someone who is right a lot. It projects confidence. You're looking for the same.
Now, just quickly, the last 2 types of questions I will cover in this short YouTube video. First one, they would ask you to talk about a challenge or a challenging situation you've been through. And I want you to notice how this question is general. And in fact, I call these types of questions as gifts for you as a candidate, and you'll see what I mean by this in a moment. Also, importantly here, this is a behavioral question. That is, they ask you for a past experience in order to predict your future performance on the job. Okay, so how do you go about answering such a broad question about a challenge you had to go through? And my simple one-line answer to this would be using your best story. You see, going through such intense interviews, you will have to build your own story bank. I don't know, maybe 20 stories. And out of those stories, some will be better than others. And there will always going to be those 1 or 2 stories that you have to mention in your interview. So I'd really encourage you here to think, what's that one story you want them to remember about you? Because in my experience, that's also often going to qualify as your best answer to tell me about a challenge. And last but not least, and in fact, this is the second most asked interview question with Meta, at least according to my statistics, why Meta, or why Facebook if you want? An interesting place to start answering this question is Facebook's recently redesigned culture page, where, by the way, they also recently removed Be Bold and I believe even more strongly emphasized on move fast and be yourself. So maybe give it a good read, and I'm sure you'll find something interesting there, hopefully something which is also linked with your strength. These would be my top priorities for when going into a job interview with Meta. Thank you very much for watching, and good luck with your interview.